He had the world at his feet. A billionaire tycoon. Untouchable. Until a tragic accident took his legs and stripped away his empire. They say you know who your friends are when the money runs out. Leonardo found out the hard way. His wife, his uncle, they didn't just leave. They left him for dead. He was alone in the dark. Until she walked in. Lana rose. She didn't see a bank account. She saw a man. She loved him when he had nothing. But Lana didn't know the truth. He wasn't. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where our community is from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you enjoy these stories, please don't forget to subscribe. The storm outside the penthouse was apocalyptic. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling tempered glass of the master suite, blurring the glittering skyline of Manhattan into smeared streaks of cold neon and gray static. Inside, the silence was heavier than the thunder. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale expensive cologne, the scent of a hospital trying to disguise itself as a palace. Leonardo sat in the center of the room, positioned like a statue in a museum that was about to be condemned. At 25, he was the envy of the Western world. A billionaire tycoon, a prodigy of industry, and the heir to a legacy that controlled shipping lanes and tech giants. But tonight, seated in a high-tech, motorized wheelchair that hummed with a low, menacing electric buzz, he looked small. He looked broken. Dr. Aries, a nervous man with thinning hair and spectacles that kept sliding down his sweating nose, stood by the fireplace. He wouldn't look Leonardo in the eye. Instead, he focused on the tablet in his hands, scrolling through digital X-rays that glowed with a ghostly blue light. Standing behind the doctor, like vultures waiting for a carcass to stop twitching, were James and Linda. James, Leonardo's 50-year-old uncle, wore a suit that cost more than most people's cars, yet he wore it with the discomfort of a man who was always reaching for more than he could grasp. He was tapping his Italian leather shoe against the parquet floor, a rhythmic tap-tap-tap that betrayed his impatience. Beside him stood Linda, Leonardo's 20-year-old wife. She was undeniably beautiful, a vision in a silk evening gown, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves. But her beauty was cold, like a diamond kept in a freezer. She wasn't looking at her husband. She was looking at her reflection in the darkened window, fixing a stray hair. "Doctor," Leonardo said. His voice was raspy, stripped of its usual commanding baritone. "Stop looking at the screen. Tell me." Dr. Aries flinched. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the cavernous room. "Mr. Leonardo, we have reviewed the scans from the specialist in Zurich. We have consulted with the neurosurgeons at Mount Sinai. The trauma to the lumbar spine is extensive." "Extensive?" James interrupted, his voice sharp. "What does that mean in plain English? We have a board meeting on Tuesday. Can he stand?" Dr. Aries finally looked up, his eyes filled with professional pity. "No, sir. The spinal cord has been severed. The paralysis in his lower extremities is permanent. Leonardo will never walk again." The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. A crack of thunder shook the building, but no one moved. Leonardo stared at his legs, legs that had run marathons, legs that had carried him into boardrooms and onto private jets. Now, they were dead weight, covered by a cashmere blanket that felt more like a shroud. For a long moment, Leonardo watched his family. This was the moment. This was the crucible. He expected tears. He expected Linda to rush to his side, to hold his hand, to tell him that they would figure it out together. He expected James to put a hand on his shoulder and promise to be his strength. Instead, Linda let out a long, audible sigh. It wasn't a sigh of grief. It was a sigh of inconvenience. "Never?" Linda asked, her voice shrill. She turned to the doctor, her face twisting not in sorrow, but in distaste. "You mean he's going to be in that thing forever?" She gestured vaguely at the wheelchair as if it were a contagious disease. "Linda," Leonardo whispered, reaching a hand out toward her. "I'm still here." She didn't take his hand. She actually took a half step back. "This isn't what I signed up for, Leo. I'm 20 years old. I'm not a nurse. I can't be pushing you around Venice or Paris. People will stare. It's embarrassing. The cruelty was so casual, so effortless, that it felt like a physical slap. Leonardo lowered his hand, his jaw tightening. James stepped forward, but not to comfort. He walked past Leonardo to the window, looking out at the city he desperately wanted to own. "This is a disaster," James muttered, running a hand through his grey hair. "A disaster for the stock price. A cripple at the helm of the company? The shareholders will panic. They need strength, Leo. They need vitality. You look weak." "I am the same man who built this company's quarterly profits, Uncle," Leonardo said, injecting a flicker of his old fire into his voice. "My brain isn't paralyzed. Just my legs." James turned, a sneer curling his lip. "In our world, perception is reality. You are a broken horse, Leo. And you know what we do with broken horses." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy and gross between them. "Is that all I am to you?" Leonardo asked, his voice dropping to a low growl. "An asset? A horse?" "Don't be dramatic," Linda snapped, finally looking at him. Her eyes were devoid of love. They were calculating, assessing the new reality. "James is right. You need to be realistic. You can't go to the gala next week like this. You'd look pathetic. Maybe you should stay here. Out of sight." "Out of sight," Leonardo repeated. "Like a mistake." "Ideally," James said cold-heartedly, "we can issue a press release. Say you're taking a sabbatical for health reasons. I'll step in as interim CEO. It's the only logical move to save the family wealth." Leonardo looked down at his unmoving legs, hiding the flash of intense, burning intelligence in his eyes. He let his shoulders slump, physically manifesting the defeat they wanted to see. He needed them to believe he was broken. He needed them to overplay their hand. "I'm tired," Leonardo said softly. "Please. Just leave me alone." "Gladly," Linda said. She grabbed her purse, the gold chain clinking loudly. "I'm going to the guest wing. The smell of those medicines is giving me a migraine." She walked out without looking back. James lingered for a second, staring at the back of Leonardo's head with a look of predatory hunger. "Rest up, Leo," James said, his voice dripping with false concern. "You're going to have a lot of free time from now on." The door clicked shut. The heavy oak trapped Leonardo in the silence. Slowly, very slowly, Leonardo lifted his head. The rain continued to batter the glass, but the despair on his face evaporated, replaced by a look of cold, hard steel. He stared at the reflection of the closed door. The test had begun, and the glass castle was shattering exactly as he had planned. They thought he was the victim, but they had no idea they were the ones trapped in the room with him. 2 weeks had passed since the diagnosis, and the atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted from a hospital ward to a funeral home. But today, the funeral wasn't for Leonardo's legs. It was for his empire. Or at least, that was the script Leonardo had written. He summoned them to the grand study, a room lined with first-edition books and smelling of mahogany and old money. Outside, the city was gray and overcast, casting a pallid light through the heavy velvet drapes. Leonardo sat behind his massive desk in his wheelchair, looking smaller than ever. He had stopped shaving, allowing a patchy stubble to grow, and wore a simple, slightly wrinkled sweater instead of his usual tailored suits. He needed to look like a man who had given up. James and Linda entered together. They didn't knock. They walked in with the air of people who already owned the place, their eyes scanning the room not for Leonardo, but for items of value. James was holding a glass of Leonardo's finest scotch, without asking. Linda was scrolling on her phone, looking bored. "Make it quick, Leo," James said, taking a sip of the amber liquid. "I have a meeting with the board in an hour to discuss your transition away from leadership." "There is no board meeting, Uncle," Leonardo said softly, his voice trembling just enough to be convincing. James paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me." Leonardo slid a stack of documents across the polished desk. They were heavy, official-looking, and completely fabricated. The accident, Leonardo whispered, staring at his hands. It spooked the investors. The Asian markets pulled out at midnight. The ripple effect was catastrophic. Linda finally looked up from her phone. Catastrophic? What does that mean? Did we lose a few million? We have billions, Leo. We had billions, Leonardo corrected, meeting her gaze with watery, pleading eyes. The loans were leveraged against the stock. When the stock tanked this morning, the banks called in everything. The liquidity is gone. The offshore accounts are frozen by the SEC pending an investigation into mismanagement due to my condition. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence suffocate them. I am bankrupt, he choked out. This penthouse? Foreclosed. The cars? Repossessed tomorrow. The accounts? Empty. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a predator realizing its prey has no meat on its bones. James dropped his glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, scotch splashing onto the expensive Persian rug. He didn't even blink. His face went from confusion to a deep, violently flushed purple. He scrambled for the papers, tearing through them with shaking hands. This is impossible. You stupid, invalid fool. How could you let this happen? I was in a coma, James. Leonardo cried out, gripping the armrests of his chair. I needed you to watch the shop. But it's gone. All of it. Linda let out a sound that was half laugh, half shriek. She walked slowly toward the desk, her heels clicking like gunshots. She looked at the papers, then at Leonardo. Her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered ugliness. So, she said, her voice icy. You're telling me that not only are you a cripple who can't satisfy me, can't walk with me, and can't take me anywhere, but now you're also poor? We can rebuild, Linda, Leonardo pleaded, stretching his hand out to her. I still have my mind. We can move to a small apartment in Queens. I saw a listing. It's a walk-up, but if you help me, we can make it a home. We can start over. I just need your love. I need my wife. The test was laid bare. It was the ultimate ultimatum. Love or money? Linda looked at his outstretched hand as if it were a dead rat. She didn't take it. Instead, she reached for her left hand and violently yanked off her wedding ring. A 10-carat diamond that caught the dim light. Queens? She spat. You want me to live in Queens? With you. She laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. I didn't marry you for your personality, Leo. I married a billionaire. I didn't sign up to change bedpans in a studio apartment. She threw the ring at him. It bounced off his chest and landed in his lap. I'm filing for divorce, she announced, turning on her heel. And don't think I won't fight for half of whatever scraps are left. I'm calling my lawyer. Linda, wait. Leo called out, though his heart wasn't in it. He turned his gaze to James. Uncle? Your family. You're my father's brother. You won't leave me, right? We can crash at your estate until I get back on my feet. James was staring at the wall, calculating. He looked at Leonardo with cold, dead eyes. My estate? You think I'm going to drag a bankrupt anchor around my neck? You're toxic. Leo. If the street hears I'm harboring you, they'll think I'm part of this failure. James buttoned his jacket, smoothing out the wrinkles. You're on your own. Don't call me. Don't come to the club. As far as I'm concerned, the Leonardo I knew died in that car crash. This. He gestured vaguely at the wheelchair. This is just waste. James turned and followed Linda out the door. And clean up that scotch, he barked over his shoulder. It's a stain. The heavy double doors slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the empty house. Leonardo sat motionless for a long time. The room was silent. The performance was over. Slowly, the look of desperate pleading vanished from his face. He picked up the diamond ring from his lap, holding it up to the light. It was cold and hard, just like the woman who wore it. A small grim smile touched his lips. It hurt, deep in his chest, to see the truth so nakedly. But the pain was secondary to the relief. The parasites had detached themselves. The ship was empty. Now, he could finally see who would swim through the storm to save him. He pressed a hidden button under his desk. "Martha," he said into the intercom, his voice steady and strong. "They're gone. You can come in now." The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was profound. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a mausoleum. The penthouse, once a hive of socialites, business partners, and expensive laughter, now felt like a hollow shell floating in the gray sky. Leonardo remained at his desk, the diamond ring still sitting cold in his palm. He didn't move. He sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the distant kitchen and the drumming of the rain, which had softened to a mournful drizzle. He had won. He had successfully purged the parasites from his life. But victory tasted remarkably like ash. It was one thing to suspect your wife and uncle only loved your money. It was another thing entirely to watch them walk away from you without a backward glance, leaving you for dead. The library door creaked open. It wasn't the aggressive entrance of James, nor the impatient entrance of Linda. It was slow, respectful. Martha stood there. At 40 years old, she was a figure of quiet strength. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture upright, but her eyes, dark, deep and knowing, were filled with a profound sadness. She carried a silver tray with a single porcelain cup of Earl Grey tea, steaming gently in the cool air. She walked across the room, the sound of her sensible shoes muffled by the thick rugs. She placed the tea on the desk, right next to the fake bankruptcy papers. She didn't look at the papers. She looked at Leonardo. "They're gone, honey," Martha said softly. Her voice was a balm, warm and grounding. "They didn't even look back, Martha," Leonardo said, his voice cracking. He dropped the ring onto the desk. It spun and settled with a hollow clink. 10 years with Uncle James. 2 years with Linda. And it took them less than 10 minutes to erase me. Trash has a way of taking itself out when the wind blows hard enough, Martha said, her tone hardening. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was a breach of protocol for a maid, but Martha had been more of a mother to him than his own had been able to be. "You are better off. A house built on sand was always going to fall." "I have nothing to offer you now, Martha," Leo said, keeping up the ruse, testing even her. "The accounts are dry. I can't pay your wages. You should go. Find a family that can pay you what you're worth." Martha chuckled, a low, rich sound that seemed to push back the shadows in the room. "Boy, I changed your diapers. I bandaged your knees when you fell off your first bike. You think I'm here for the check? I saved my money. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and you are my family." Leonardo felt a lump form in his throat. He covered her hand with his own. She passed the test instantly, effortlessly. "But we have a problem," Martha continued, her face turning serious. "I can cook, and I can clean, and I can keep the wolves at the door. But my back, it's not what it used to be. The doctor said you need full-time care. Lifting, physical therapy, moving from the bed to the chair. I can't do that alone, Leo. I'm strong, but I'm not that strong." Leonardo nodded, looking at his legs. "I can't afford a nurse, Martha. And I don't want a stranger here staring at me with pity." "I don't know any strangers," Martha said, a twinkle appearing in her eye. "But I have a niece. Lana." Lana rose. Martha pulled a small, crumpled photo from her apron pocket and placed it on the desk. "She's 25. Just finished her nursing rotations. She's smart, she's strong, and she's looking for work. She's been living in the city, struggling to find a place that treats her right. She doesn't care about money, and she certainly doesn't care about high society. She cares about people. Leonardo looked at the photo. The girl in the picture had skin the color of warm mahogany and a smile that seemed to radiate genuine joy. She was beautiful, yes, slim, elegant, but there was a kindness in her eyes that Linda had never possessed. "Call her," Leonardo said quietly. The next morning, the heavy oak doors opened to a new chapter. Lana Rose stepped into the foyer. She wore a simple beige trench coat that had seen better days, and her hair was pulled back in a practical curly bun. She carried a single, battered suitcase. She stopped in the center of the grand hallway, looking up at the crystal chandelier that was currently gathering dust. She didn't look covetous, she looked curious. Martha came rushing out of the kitchen, embracing her niece in a hug that lifted the younger woman off her feet. "Look at you. You're too skinny, girl. We need to feed you." Lana laughed, the sound bright and musical, bouncing off the marble walls. "It's good to see you, Auntie." "Come," Martha said, lowering her voice. "He's in the sunroom. Be gentle. He's hurt. In more ways than one." Lana nodded, her expression shifting from joy to professional compassion. She followed Martha through the house. Leonardo was sitting in the sunroom, facing the garden. The winter light was harsh, exposing the dark circles under his eyes. He heard them enter and turned his wheelchair slowly. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Leonardo had expected a nurse. He had expected someone clinical, detached. He wasn't prepared for the sudden warmth that flooded the room when Lana looked at him. She didn't stare at the wheelchair. She didn't look at his legs with the morbid curiosity everyone else displayed. She looked him straight in the eye. "Hello, Mr. Leonardo," she said, stepping forward and extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm against his cold palm. "I'm Lana. Auntie Martha says you need a teammate." "A teammate," Leonardo repeated, taken aback. "Most people call it a caregiver. Or a babysitter." Lana smiled, and it changed her entire face. It wasn't a polite smile. It was real. Babysitters are for children. You're a man who's been through a war. You need someone to watch your back, not wipe your nose. I'm here to help you get strong. Leonardo stared at her. For the last month, he had been an object of pity or a financial burden. To this girl, he was just a man. "I can't pay you much," Leonardo lied, watching her closely for a reaction. "Room and board. A small stipend. That's it." Lana shrugged, taking off her coat and draping it over a chair. "I'm not here to get rich, sir. I'm here because family helps family. And if you're Martha's family, then you're mine too." She rolled up her sleeves, revealing slender but capable arms. "Now," she said, walking behind his chair. "The sun is going down and it's getting cold in here. How about we get you to the living room and get a fire started? I make a mean hot chocolate." As she pushed his chair, Leonardo felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't the thrill of the deception, and it wasn't the bitterness of his loss. It was the terrifying electric spark of hope. Lana moved into the guest room down the hall, the same room Linda used to complain smelled like old dust, though Lana said it smelled like history. Within 48 hours, the penthouse underwent a subtle molecular change. The heavy velvet drapes, which had been drawn shut for weeks to mourn the death of Leonardo's bank account, were thrown wide open. The winter sun, usually cold and gray, seemed to find new warmth as it hit the polished floors. Life settled into a rhythm. It was intimate, demanding, and dangerously comfortable. For Leonardo, the deception became harder, not because of the physical toll of feigning paralysis, but because of the emotional weight of Lana's sincerity. Every morning, she would knock softly on his door at 7 a.m., carrying a basin of warm water and a fresh towel. "Rise and shine, sleeping beauty," she would say, her voice a soft hum that woke him better than any alarm clock. The physical reality of his condition meant that Lana had to be in his personal space constantly. Unlike the nurses at the hospital who handled him with clinical detachment, or Linda who avoided touching him entirely, Lana's touch was different. It was firm, assured, but gentle. One morning, the routine shifted. Leonardo was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing only his pajama bottoms. He had to maintain the act of dead weight in his legs, forcing his upper body to slump slightly, hiding the core strength he still possessed. "All right, big man," Lana said, positioning herself in front of him to help him transfer to the wheelchair. "Arms around my neck." Leonardo hesitated. "Lana, I'm heavy. You'll hurt your back. Let me call Martha." "Hush," she commanded playfully. "I grew up wrestling 3 older brothers. You're just a lot of height and bad attitude. I got this." He wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She smelled of cocoa butter and rain. As she braced her legs and lifted, their faces were inches apart. He could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. He could feel the steady rhythm of her breath against his neck. She grunted with the effort, lifting him and pivoting toward the chair. For a split second, Leonardo's instinct was to plant his feet and help her. His muscles twitched, screaming to take the load. He had to mentally scream back at his own body. "Don't move. Stay limp." She settled him into the chair with a soft doof. She didn't pull away immediately. She stayed there, her hands on his shoulders, straightening his shirt. She was close enough that he could see the pulse jumping in her throat. "See?" She smiled, breathless but triumphant. "I didn't break." "You're stronger than you look," Leo murmured, his voice lower than intended. "And you," she whispered, her gaze dropping to his chest before snapping back to his eyes, "are heavier than a bankrupt man should be. You've been eating too much of Auntie's cornbread." The air between them crackled. It wasn't the tension of a patient and a nurse. It was the tension of a man and a woman. Leo felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the exertion. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to stand up, wrap his arms around her waist, and show her just how strong he really was. But the fear held him back. "Not yet," a voice whispered. "Make sure it's real." As the weeks bled into a month, the dynamic shifted from physical care to emotional resonance. They spent the long evenings in the library. Leo could no longer afford the expensive subscriptions and digital distractions, so they reverted to the analog. He would read aloud, poetry, philosophy, old adventure novels, while Lana sat on the rug, mending old clothes or simply listening, her head resting on the arm of his chair. "Why do you stay, Lana?" Leo asked one rainy Tuesday. The question had been burning a hole in his tongue. "Truly. Martha is family. She has a duty. You don't. I can't pay you. I can't take you out dancing. I'm a sinking ship." Lana stopped sewing. She looked up at him, the firelight dancing on her dark skin. "My father used to say that you don't measure a man by how he stands in comfort, but how he stands in the storm." She set her sewing aside and moved to sit on the ottoman directly in front of him. She took his hands that used to sign $1,000,000 checks, and held them in her own. "I see a man who lost everything and didn't turn bitter," she said softly. "I see a man who treats his maid like a mother. I see a man who reads poetry like he feels every word." "Linda." She saw the wallet. "I see the man. And if I never walk again?" Leo tested, his heart hammering against his ribs. "If I'm in this chair until I'm 80? Lana squeezed his hands. "Then I'll buy some really comfortable shoes, Leo. Because I'm not going anywhere." A silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of unsaid things. Leonardo leaned forward, drawn by a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. Lana didn't pull back. Her eyes fluttered half shut, her lips parting slightly. He was inches from her. He could taste the sweetness of the moment. Crash! A thunderclap shook the building, breaking the spell. Lana jumped, laughing nervously, and pulled back. I should check on the windows," she stammered, standing up quickly, her cheeks flushed. "Yes," Leo said, his voice hoarse. "The windows." She hurried out of the room. Leo watched her go, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white. He looked down at his legs. He flexed his toes inside his slippers, unseen by anyone but the shadows. He was falling in love. And for the first time in his life, he was terrified. Because when he finally stood up, he wouldn't just be revealing a miracle. He would be revealing a lie. And he didn't know if she would forgive him for it. 3 months had passed since the bankruptcy. The penthouse, once a fortress of automated luxury, had slowly transformed into something more primitive. To maintain the ruse of poverty, Leonardo had Martha cancel the premium maintenance contracts. The heating was kept low to save money, and the vast empty rooms were often chilly. It was a Tuesday night when the city of New York groaned under the weight of a massive nor'easter. The wind howled like a banshee, slamming against the glass walls of the penthouse with enough force to make the steel girders groan. Leonardo was in the study, staring at a chessboard. He was playing against himself, white versus black, truth versus lie. Suddenly the world went black. A transformer blew somewhere in the grid below. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The digital clocks vanished. The penthouse was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. "Leo!" Lana's voice called out from the hallway, laced with sudden panic. "I'm in the study, Lana," he replied, his voice calm in the void. "Stay where you are. Don't trip." A moment later, a flickering orange glow appeared in the doorway. Lana entered, holding a thick pillar candle in a brass holder. The flame cast long, dancing shadows against the walls, illuminating her face in soft, golden relief. She looked like a painting from the Renaissance, an angel descending into purgatory. "The whole block is out," she said, shivering slightly as she walked toward him. She placed the candle on the chessboard, the light glinting off the pieces. "It's getting cold fast. The backup generators. I sold them," Leo lied. He hadn't, of course. He had simply disabled the transfer switch. "We're in the dark, Lana. Just like the rest of the city." She didn't complain. She didn't lament the lack of Wi-Fi or heat. She simply moved the ottoman closer to his wheelchair and sat down, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. "Well," she smiled, the candlelight reflecting in her dark eyes. "Then we'll just have to keep each other warm." The atmosphere shifted. The storm outside felt a million miles away. The only world that existed was the 3-foot circle of light around the chess table. "Lana," Leo started, his voice rough. The guilt was clawing at his throat. He looked at this woman, who was sitting in the cold, in the dark, with a man she believed was a destitute cripple. "You don't have to do this. You're 25. You should be at a club. You should be with friends. You shouldn't be trapped in a freezer with a ghost." Lana reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was iron. "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop trying to push me away. Do you think I want to be in a club? Surrounded by people who scream to be heard but say nothing?" She leaned in closer, the scent of vanilla and rain filling his senses. "I've never felt more seen than I do right now. In this room. With you." "But I have nothing," Leo insisted, the lie tasting like bile. "I can't give you the world." "You are my world, Leo," she said, the confession hanging in the air, heavy and absolute. She stood up slowly. In the flickering light, she looked ethereal. She stepped between his knees, her hands resting on his shoulders. She looked down at him, not with pity, but with a hunger that matched his own. "I don't care about the legs," she whispered, leaning down. "I care about the heart." She kissed him. It wasn't a tentative, careful kiss. It was desperate. It was the collision of two lonely souls finally finding their match. Leo's hands gripped her waist, his act momentarily forgotten in the rush of passion. He pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. For a terrifying second, his legs braced against the footrests. He was about to stand. He wanted to lift her, to carry her to the bedroom, to show her that he was whole. No, his mind screamed. Not yet. If she finds out now, she'll think you tricked her into bed. She'll hate you. With agonizing restraint, he forced his body to remain seated, to remain broken. He broke the kiss, breathless, his forehead resting against hers. Lana, he gasped. I know, she soothed, misinterpreting his hesitation as insecurity about his disability. She stroked his cheek. It's okay. We take it slow. I'm not going anywhere. She pulled back, smiling softly. I'm going to go find more blankets. We'll camp out here tonight. Don't go running off. She winked, a small joke about his condition that felt intimate rather than cruel, and took the candle, disappearing into the hallway. Leonardo sat in the renewed darkness, his heart pounding like a sledgehammer. He touched his lips where she had kissed him. He was the happiest man alive, and the most miserable. He had the answer he needed. She loved him. She truly, deeply loved him for nothing but himself. The test was over. He had won. But as he sat there, listening to the wind howl, a new fear took root. The game had gone on too long. When he revealed the truth, that he was a billionaire, that he could walk, that he had tested her like a lab rat, would she see it as a romantic gesture? Or would she see it as the ultimate betrayal of trust? He resolved to tell her tomorrow. No more games. As soon as the sun rose, he would stand up and give her the world. But the world had other plans. As the storm raged on, headlights cut through the darkness outside the window below. A black SUV pulled up to the service entrance of the building. The vultures had heard the rumors of the abandoned penthouse, and they were coming to pick the bones before the sun came up. The storm passed during the night, leaving the morning sky a bruised purple and gray. The power was still out, and the penthouse was steeped in a damp, bone-deep chill. Leonardo and Lana had fallen asleep in the library, wrapped in blankets on the large leather sofa. It was the most peaceful sleep Leonardo had known in years. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Lana's face, softened by sleep, her hand resting protectively over his heart. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, a resolve hardening within him like concrete setting. Today, he told himself. Today I tell her. Today I stand up. He carefully untangled himself, shifting his legs, which he could move perfectly well, just enough to get comfortable without waking her. He was rehearsing the words in his head. Lana, I lied because I was afraid. Lana, I can give you everything. Ping. The sound cut through the silence like a scalpel. It was the private elevator in the foyer. The chime that signaled an arrival. Leonardo froze. Only 3 people had the override code for that elevator. Himself, Martha, and... Who's that? Lana whispered, stirring awake, her eyes wide with sudden alarm. Stay here, Leo commanded, his voice dropping to a low growl. He spun his wheelchair around, his hands gripping the rims with white-knuckled force. Before he could reach the hallway, the heavy double doors of the library were thrown open. They didn't just open, they banged against the walls. James and Linda strode in. They looked like they had been sent from a casting agency for desperate socialites. James was wearing a trench coat that was wet at the hem, his face flushed and sweating despite the cold. Linda was wearing large sunglasses, which she pushed up onto her head as she scanned the room with predatory intensity. Behind them stood 2 men in cheap suits, private security, or perhaps just hired muscle. I told you they'd still be here squatted like rats. Linda announced, her voice shrill and grating. She looked at the blankets on the sofa, then at Lana, who was standing up, pulling her cardigan tight. Oh God, James. Look at this. It smells like poverty in here. What are you doing here? Leonardo demanded, wheeling himself into the center of the room to create a barrier between them and Lana. I thought I was dead to you. James laughed, a barking, humorless sound. He walked over to the bookshelf, running a finger along the spines of the rare first editions. You are dead to us, Leo. Financially dead. socially dead. But we heard a rumor. My source at the bank says the foreclosure teams are coming at noon to padlock the doors. He turned, his eyes gleaming with greed. Which means we have exactly 3 hours to salvage what belongs to the family before the bank seizes it all. Nothing belongs to you, Leo said, his voice deadly calm. Everything in this apartment is listed in the bankruptcy filing. If you take a toothpick, it's a federal crime. Sue me, James sneered. He snapped his fingers at the 2 hired goons. Check the wall safe behind the Modigliani. And grab the silver service from the dining room. Move. No. Lana shouted. She didn't cower. She didn't run. She stepped out from behind the sofa, placing herself directly in the path of the 2 men. She was half their size, shaking with fear, but her chin was high. This is his home, Lana declared, her voice trembling but clear. You have no right to touch anything. Get out. Linda stepped forward, looking Lana up and down with a sneer that would have withered a flower. Oh, look at this. The maid's niece thinks she's the lady of the manor. Did you think sleeping with a cripple would get you a payout, honey? There's no money left. You're fighting over a corpse. I'm fighting for a human being, Lana retorted, her eyes blazing. Something neither of you would understand. Linda's face contorted. She stepped forward and shoved Lana hard. Lana stumbled back, hitting the edge of the heavy desk. Don't touch her. Leonardo roared. The sound erupted from his chest, primal and terrifying. James ignored him, walking toward the painting that hid the safe. Linda, keep the help occupied. I need the combination. He looked at Leo. What is it, Leo? The birthday? The wedding anniversary? Or did you change it to the day you ruined your life? I'm warning you, James, Leo said, his hand drifting toward the heavy crystal decanter on the low table beside him. Walk out that door now, and I might let you live this down. Touch that safe and I will destroy you. James paused. He looked at Leonardo. For a second, he saw something in his nephew's eyes. A glint of blue steel that reminded him of Leo's father, a man who had crushed competitors for sport. But then James looked at the wheelchair. He looked at the blanket covering the useless legs. And his arrogance returned. You'll destroy me? James chuckled, shaking his head. From where? Down there. You're a toothless lion, Leo. You can't even stand up to stop me. James reached for the painting and ripped it off the wall, throwing it onto the floor. He began punching numbers into the keypad. Linda, James barked. Check the bedroom. The jewelry box. If he didn't sell the necklace, I want it. With pleasure, Linda smirked. She started toward the hallway. Lana moved to stop her, but one of the hired guards grabbed Lana by the arm, twisting it behind her back. Sit down, girl, the guard grunted. Lana cried out in pain. That was the breaking point. Leonardo's vision went red. The test was over. The data collection was complete. The verdict was guilty, and the sentence was about to be executed. His hands gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. His triceps flared. His quadriceps, muscles that had been secretly exercised for months, tensed like coiled springs. Let her go, Leo said. His voice was no longer loud. It was a whisper. But it was a whisper that carried the weight of an executioner's blade. Or what? The guard laughed, tightening his grip on Lana. Leonardo looked at Lana. He saw the tears in her eyes, not for herself, but the look of helplessness because she couldn't protect him. Lana, Leo said, locking eyes with her. Do you trust me? Yes, she sobbed. Then close your eyes. Lana squeezed her eyes shut. Leonardo kicked the brake off his wheelchair. The sound of the wheelchair brake releasing was a small click, but in the tense silence of the room, it sounded like the hammer of a gun being cocked. Lana had her eyes squeezed shut, bracing for the pain in her twisted arm. The guard, a brute named Cale who was used to bullying debtors, smirked at the cripple in the chair. He didn't see the threat. He saw a man whose legs had atrophied, a man who was helpless. He was wrong. In one fluid, explosive motion, Leonardo didn't just stand. He launched himself. The blanket covering his legs fell away, revealing not withered limbs, but legs that were strong and clad in dark tactical trousers and combat boots, a detail hidden for months under loose sweats. Leonardo crossed the 6 feet between the chair and the guard in a blur of motion. His right hand shot out, grabbing the guard's wrist, the one twisting Lana's arm. With a sickening crunch of cartilage, Leo twisted it back. Arg! The guard screamed, releasing Lana instantly. Before the man could recover, Leonardo drove a knee into his midsection, doubling him over, followed by a sharp, disciplined strike to the jaw. The guard collapsed to the floor like a sack of cement, unconscious before he hit the Persian rug. Lana gasped, her eyes flying open. She scrambled backward on the floor, her hands covering her mouth. She stared up. And up. Leonardo was standing. He was 6'2", towering over the room. His posture was perfect. There was no shaking, no weakness. He radiated a terrifying, cold power. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world turning upside down. James dropped the painting he was holding. It clattered against the floor, cracking the frame. Linda's sunglasses slid off her head and clattered onto the hardwood, but she didn't move to pick them up. Her mouth hung open, her face draining of all color until she looked like a wax figure. "Leo," James whispered, his voice trembling so hard it was barely audible. You're walking." Leonardo ignored him. He reached down and offered a hand to Lana. Lana stared at the hand. It was the same hand she had held in the dark, the same hand she had kissed. But now it belonged to a man standing on his own 2 feet. Confusion, fear, and shock warred in her eyes. Slowly, tentatively, she took his hand. He pulled her up gently, effortlessly, tucking her behind him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and rumbling in his chest. "No," she breathed, still staring at his legs. "Leo, I don't understand." "I know," he said softly, not looking at her. His eyes fixed on his uncle. "I'll explain everything. But first, I have to take out the trash." Leonardo turned his full attention to James and Linda. He took a step forward. Then another. The sound of his heavy boots on the wood floor was the only sound in the room. Thud. Thud. James stumbled back, hitting the wall. "It's a miracle," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape. "Linda, look. He's healed. This is wonderful news. Leo, we were just securing your assets for you, to keep them safe from the bank." "Stop," Leonardo said. The word wasn't shouted, but it carried such authority that James's mouth snapped shut. Leonardo stopped 3 feet from them. He adjusted his cuffs, a gesture of casual dominance that was more terrifying than a shout. "There is no bank foreclosure, James," Leo said calmly. "There is no bankruptcy. My net worth is higher today than it was 6 months ago. The stocks never crashed. The loans were never called." Linda made a choking sound. "But, the papers. The news." "I own the media outlets that ran the stories," Leo said coldly. "I wrote the narrative. And you played your parts perfectly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small remote. He pressed a button. The large mirror above the fireplace became transparent, revealing a high-definition camera lens behind it. "You're on camera," Leo informed them. "Audio and video. I have footage of you breaking and entering. I have footage of your assault on Lana. I have audio of you confessing to theft." James's knees gave out. He slid down the wall, clutching his chest. "Leo, please. We're family. Family." Leo laughed, a dark, bitter sound. "Family is the woman standing behind me, who was willing to fight 2 men to protect a cripple with no money. You are parasites. Leonardo loomed over them, his shadow swallowing them whole. Here is the ultimatum, Leo said, his voice hard as diamond. Option A. I call the commissioner. He's a personal friend. With this footage, you, Linda, and your hired muscle go to prison for burglary, assault, and attempted grand larceny. You'll spend the next 10 years in a cell. Linda began to sob, mascara running down her cheeks. No, Leo, please. I'm your wife. Ex-wife, Leo corrected. My lawyers filed the papers the moment you threw that ring at me. Option B, Leo continued, ignoring her tears. You leave right now. You walk out that door and you never come back. You sign the NDAs my lawyers have prepared. You get nothing. No alimony. No settlement. No trust fund, Uncle James. You leave with the clothes on your backs, and you disappear from my life forever. He checked his watch. You have 10 seconds to decide. We'll go. James screamed, scrambling to his feet. We'll go. Option B. We'll sign anything. Good, Leo said. He stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. Get out. James grabbed Linda by the arm, dragging her toward the exit. The second hired guard, seeing his partner unconscious and the billionaire standing tall, dropped his baton and ran after them. They fled like cockroaches exposed to the light. The front door slammed shut, sealing the penthouse once again. The silence returned, but this time, it was vibrating with energy. Leonardo stood still for a moment, listening to the fading sound of the elevator. The adrenaline that had fueled his transformation began to ebb, replaced by a cold knot of anxiety. The easy part was over. He had defeated the villains. Now came the hard part. He turned around slowly. Lana was standing by the fireplace. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at him. Her arms were crossed over her chest, a defensive posture. Her eyes were dry, but they held a look of profound betrayal that cut Leonardo deeper than any knife. Lana, he started, stepping toward her. Don't, she said, holding up a hand. Don't come any closer. I had to do it, Leo pleaded, his voice desperate. I had to know who was real. I had to know if you loved me or the money. So you tested me? Lana asked, her voice trembling. Like I was an experiment? Like a lab rat? No, like a partner. Leo argued. Everyone in my life has lied to me, Lana. Everyone sees the checkbook. I needed to know. You knew, she whispered. You knew weeks ago. When we sat in the dark. When I told you I loved you. You knew then. But you kept pretending. You let me bathe you. You let me lift you, hurting my back, while you could have stood up at any moment. She looked down at the wheelchair, then back at him. You let me cry for you, Leo. That's not love. That's manipulation. Lana, please, Leo said, dropping to his knees. Voluntarily this time. I was scared. I was scared that if I stood up, the magic would end. I was afraid you'd leave. I wouldn't have left because you could walk, Lana said, a single tear escaping. But I might leave because you lied. She turned away, walking toward the guest room. Lana! Leo called out. I need to think, she said, her voice breaking. Don't follow me. The door to her room clicked shut. Leonardo remained on his knees in the center of the vast, empty room. He was a billionaire again. He was powerful. He was the victor. But as he looked at the closed door, he realized he might have won the battle only to lose the war. Leonardo stood outside the guest room door. He didn't knock. He didn't demand entry. He simply stood guard, a silent sentinel waiting for his judgment. The penthouse was quiet now, the storm outside having finally exhausted itself, leaving the city below scrubbed clean and glittering under the moonlight. Martha walked up the hallway, carrying a fresh cup of tea. She stopped beside Leonardo, looking at the closed door, then up at the man she had raised. She's packing, Leo, Martha whispered, her voice heavy. You broke her heart to save it. That's a dangerous game. I had to be sure, Martha, Leo replied, his voice rough with regret. But I realized too late that the test itself was the betrayal. The door clicked open. Lana stepped out. She was wearing her beige trench coat and carrying her battered suitcase. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. She stopped when she saw him standing there, tall, imposing, and completely whole. The sight of him on his feet still sent a shockwave through her, a jarring reminder of the months of deception. Move, Leo, she said quietly. I'm going back to Queens. Lana, please. Leo stepped in front of her, not aggressively, but pleadingly. Before you walk out that door, you need to know the rest of the truth. The part one didn't tell James. Lana hesitated, her hand tightening on the handle of her suitcase. What more is there? You're rich, you're healthy, and you're a liar. That seems to cover it. The car accident wasn't an accident, Leo said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lana froze. Leonardo walked over to the fireplace and picked up a tablet. He tapped the screen and held it out to her. It was a technical report from the NTSB, dated 6 months ago. My brake lines didn't fail, Leo explained, his voice turning cold and clinical. They were cut. Expertly. Whoever did it wanted me dead, not injured. When I woke up in the hospital and the doctors told me I might not walk, I knew that if I showed any sign of recovery, the killer would come back to finish the job. Lana looked up from the tablet, her eyes wide with horror. You were hiding. I was playing dead, Leo nodded. I needed James and Linda to believe I was a broken, harmless invalid. I needed them to get comfortable, to get sloppy. I needed them to think they had won so they would reveal their hand. The bankruptcy wasn't just a test of loyalty, Lana. It was a trap to catch my own family trying to bury me. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. The anger in Lana's eyes began to fade, replaced by a dawning realization of the danger they had been living in. When you came into this house, Leo continued, his voice softening, I was terrified. Not because of the money, but because I was afraid you'd get caught in the crossfire. But you stood in front of me. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You didn't just pass a test, Lana. You saved my life. You kept me human when I was ready to become a monster. Lana dropped her suitcase. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She looked at the man standing before her. Not the billionaire, not the mastermind, but the man who had been terrified and alone in the dark. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Because I couldn't risk you, Leo said. But now, the police have the evidence. James and Linda will be picked up before they cross the state line. It's over. The threat is gone. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a diamond ring. He pulled out the cheap, plastic pawnshop ring Lana had worn on a chain around her neck, a keepsake from her grandmother that she had once offered to sell to buy him medicine. He had stolen it from her nightstand an hour ago. He dropped to one knee. This time, it wasn't a deception. It was an act of absolute surrender. I have billions in the bank, Leo said, looking up at her with raw vulnerability. I own skyscrapers and fleets of ships. But when I was sitting in that chair, watching you light a candle in the dark, that was the first time I felt rich. I don't want the empire if I can't have the partner. He held up the simple plastic ring. Lana rose. I am asking you to stay. Not as my nurse. Not as my savior. But as my wife. Will you help me build something real? Lana looked at the ring, then at Martha, who was wiping a tear from her cheek in the hallway. Finally, she looked back at Leo. A small, incredulous smile broke through her sorrow. You are the most complicated, frustrating man I have ever met, she laughed through a sob. Is that a yes? Leo asked, his hope rising. Stand up, Leonardo, she commanded softly. He stood. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket and pulled him down into a kiss that erased the months of lies, the fear and the silence. It was a kiss of forgiveness and fire. Yes, she whispered against his lips. But if you ever lie to me again, I'll break your legs for real. Leo laughed, wrapping his arms around her and lifting her off the ground, spinning her around in the center of the room. Outside, the clouds parted completely. The moonlight flooded the penthouse, no longer illuminating a cold, empty glass castle, but a home. The vultures were gone. The king had returned. And in his arms, he held the only treasure that mattered. If you like the story, please subscribe and hit the like button. Thanks for watching.